Egypt, somewhere between the 15th and the 13th century before Christ, an empire at its height, built on stone, gold, and obedience. The Pharaoh ruled not as a man, but as a god, the living son of Ra. His word carried more weight than law, his silence more terror than thunder. He built monuments to himself, pyramids that touched the sky, temples carved from the desert, cities named after his own glory. Pi-Ramesses, Pithom, Ramse. To outsiders, these were wonders. To those who built them, they were prisons of stone. Among the laborers were a small, foreign people, Hebrew slaves. Their hands shaped the bricks. Their sweat filled the Nile. They were not soldiers. They had no power, but they carried a story older than Egypt itself. The promise of a god who would not stay silent forever. And then silence broke. First came the water, the Nile. Egypt's lifeblood turned red. Then the sky. Frogs fell from it. Darkness covered it, and death walked beneath it. 10 plagues, 10 blows against the throne of a man who thought himself divine. Each one tore at the fabric of Egyptian belief. The river god Hapi was mocked. The sun god Ra was darkened. And Pharaoh, the god king, watched his empire tremble. The last plague broke him, the death of the firstborn, a punishment no priest could reverse, no monument could protect. In the night, he surrendered. He let them go, a nation of slaves, armed with nothing but faith and stolen gold. Walked out of Egypt, into the wilderness, into history. Behind them, the empire of gods bled. Ahead of them, only sand. They believed freedom waited somewhere beyond the horizon. They did not know that the horizon itself would try to kill them, because power never lets go quietly, and gods made by men never die easily. The Hebrews fled. They left behind cities of stone and smoke. They carried only what they could hold: bread, children, and faith. But in the halls of Pharaoh, silence turned to rage. An empire does not lose its slaves without blood. An empire does not accept humiliation. The Pharaoh's heart, the text says, was hardened. Perhaps it was pride. Perhaps it was fear. Perhaps it was both. He summoned his army, the finest in the ancient world. Chariots, gleaming in the sun, spears of bronze, horses trained to charge until they drowned. The command was simple: bring them back. The desert became a hunt. Dust rose behind 600 chariots. The wind carried the sound of hooves, a distant thunder that grew louder each hour. The Hebrews could see it, the cloud on the horizon, the flash of bronze in the sun. They ran faster, but freedom is rarely a straight road. Moses led them south, away from the trade routes, away from safety. The path narrowed into wasteland. Mountains closed on both sides. Before them, water. Behind them, death. The sea stretched wide and endless. No bridge, no boats, just the slow rhythm of waves hitting the sand. They were trapped. Panic spread through the camp. Voices rose against Moses. They asked him, "Was it for this that you led us out? To die here, between sand and sea?" It was not a question of faith. It was a question of logic. Empires have chariots. Slaves have hope. And hope, alone, drowns easily. The Hebrew text calls this place Yam Suf, the Sea of Reeds. Some say it was the Red Sea, the deep waters between Egypt and Arabia. Others say it was a shallow marsh, a maze of lagoons and lakes near the Suez, where reeds grew thick and the water, though shallow, could swallow a man. Historians argue still, was it miracle or meteorology, a divine hand, or a shift of wind and tide? But that night, it was not theory, it was terror. Behind them, 600 chariots, Before them, a sea without mercy, and somewhere between the two, a man stood, holding a staff, and dared to believe that the laws of heaven and earth were not finished speaking. Night fell. Cold wind moved across the desert. The sky was black. No moon, no star. Moses stood before the sea. Behind him, thousands waited. Families, soldiers, the terrified and the faithful. He raised his staff, not in command, but in surrender. The wind began. The scripture says it came from the east, a strong wind that blew all night, not a momentary gust, but a sustained force, as if the breath of creation itself was holding its lungs. Sand lifted, reeds bent. The sound grew, a deep, continuous hum, like the earth exhaling. And the water began to move, at first, slowly, a trembling on the surface, a shift in rhythm. Then, the shoreline pulled back, the tide withdrew, and the seabed emerged, slick and shining under the wind. It was not sudden, it was deliberate, like the work of an engineer. Scientists call this the wind set-down effect, when a strong, sustained wind blows over a shallow body of water. It can push the water away, exposing dry land beneath. It requires speed, direction, and time. All three happened that night. The wind held the sea apart, not for minutes, for hours, enough for an entire nation to cross. Was it chance or precision? To the believer, it was the timing that mattered, not the wind itself. But when it came, at the exact moment, they were trapped. To the skeptic, it was nature, a rare event, but not impossible. To both, it was survival. The people stepped forward. Feet sank into mud, but did not stop. They walked between walls of water, held back by invisible hands. The sound was deafening. Wind, waves, and whispers. Children clung to their mothers. Men carried the old. Every step forward was a prayer that the sea would not remember its purpose. Behind them, the wind still howled. The water waited. Dawn, a faint light over the horizon. The wind still howled across the open corridor of sand and shadow. The Hebrews were crossing, one slow step after another. Their footprints pressed into the exposed seabed. Behind them stretched a vast path of mud, leading deeper into the unknown. Then, the sound, the low thunder of hooves, the clatter of bronze and wood. The Pharaoh's army had arrived. 600 chariots, each one an instrument of war. Sleek, fast, and deadly, they stopped only for a moment. The soldiers stared at the impossible sight. A sea divided, a road through chaos. Then came the order, advance. The first line entered. The horses screamed as their hooves hit the wet ground. The wheels sank an inch, then two. Still, they pressed forward. The chariot was Egypt's greatest invention. Its symbol of dominance, lightweight, balanced, engineered for desert stone. But not for this. Mud clung to the wheels. The axles groaned. The precision of Egypt's machines met the unpredictability of the earth. The scripture says, He clogged their chariot wheels so that they drove heavily. What the ancient text described as divine intervention was perhaps the simplest truth of all. Technology, when built on arrogance, fails where faith endures. The Hebrews moved faster. The soldiers shouted behind them. The horses panicked, pulling against their harnesses. One chariot overturned, then another. The line broke. The Pharaoh's elite, the finest soldiers of the ancient world, were trapped in the same path that had promised them victory. The sun rose higher. The wind began to die. The air changed. Still, heavy, silent. Somewhere between both shores, a single command echoed. To retreat, but there was no time. The wind stopped. The sea remembered its purpose. A sound like thunder split the horizon. The walls of water collapsed, not gently, but all at once. The corridor became a tomb. Bronze, flesh, and horse were swallowed in seconds. The sand shook as the sea reclaimed its bed. And then, silence again. When the sun was fully up, the water looked calm. Nothing moved, but the slow drift of foam. On the far shore, the Hebrews turned back. They saw the bodies. Soldiers, chariots, broken wheels, washing onto the sand. They did not cheer. They did not speak. Freedom and death had shared the same water. The sea closed. The wind stopped. And for a moment, the world was quiet again. But silence is never empty. It carries memory. The Hebrews stood on the far shore. No one spoke. They watched the water roll gently against the sand, as if it had never moved at all. Some wept. Some knelt. Some stared into the horizon, waiting for a hand to rise from beneath the waves. None did. The chariots of Egypt, once the pride of the world, lay broken beneath the surface. The empire that claimed to control the Nile was undone by the sea it thought it owned. History remembers kings, but sometimes it is the defeated who keep the truth. Archaeologists still search that coast. The Gulfs of Suez and Aqaba, the shallow marshes once called Yam Suf, the Sea of Reeds. They find fragments, a wheel-shaped coral, a shard of bronze, a remnant of a chariot's hub. Coincidence, perhaps, or testimony, if one listens long enough. But evidence was never the point. The miracle of the sea was not that it parted, but that it parted then, at the precise moment between pursuit and extinction, between despair and deliverance. Faith, like the wind, is invisible. You cannot see it move. You can only see what it leaves behind. Egypt tried to erase the event. No tablet records it. No scroll admits defeat. Empires never write their failures. But in the memory of slaves, the story lived, passed from campfire to campfire, from exile to exile, from language to language, and through centuries of retelling, the Red Sea became more than a place. It became a mirror. Every generation that has faced its own impossible shore has seen themselves reflected in that water. When they marched for freedom, they called it Exodus. When they stood before tanks and tyrants, they called it deliverance. The same sea, the same fear, the same wind. The path that once opened in mud and miracle still opens in the hearts of those who dare to move. When the tide says no, the Pharaoh is gone. His monuments crumble in the sand. His gods are names without worshippers. But the story, the moment when human will met divine timing, has not drowned. The sea remembers. The wind remembers. And perhaps, so does God. Egypt did not speak of the sea. Empires rarely record the moments that humble them. But somewhere, deep inside a royal tomb, the silence told its own story. The Pharaoh who led the pursuit, whether Ramses or his son Merneptah, was buried with the same ceremony as every god-king before him. Golden mask, perfumed wrappings, prayers to the sun, and yet there was something different. His body bore no wounds. His bones were not broken, but his face was frozen in something between shock and defiance. Centuries later, when the tomb was opened, the skin still clung to the skull, brown, tight, preserved, the eyes half closed, as if watching. For the Egyptians, to preserve the body was to preserve the soul, to live forever in form, if not in spirit. But in this case, preservation felt more like punishment. The Quran records a single, haunting line. "Today we shall save you in your body, that you may be a sign to those who come after you." A God who could not die, but could never live again. Pharaoh had chased the Hebrews into the sea. Now he lay embalmed beside it, still, eternal, defeated. For centuries, his name was erased from the monuments. The priests feared even to speak it, because his failure was not just military, it was cosmic. He had challenged another god and lost. The irony is cruel. The empire that claimed to master death was undone by it. The engineers who mastered rivers and irrigation were powerless before the tide. The same empire that taught the world how to build in stone learned that water can erase anything. Pharaoh's army drowned. Pharaoh's name faded, but his body remained, a monument not to glory, but to memory. It rests today behind glass. Tourists walk past it in silence. Some stare, some look away. None see a god. They see a man who believed he could not drown. He still hasn't. And that, perhaps, is the cruelest miracle of all. The story of the sea has never rested. It moves, like the water itself, between science and faith. For thousands of years, people have argued about what truly happened that night. Did the sea part? Or did the wind simply shift? Was it a miracle of heaven or a miracle of timing? Modern science tried to answer, not with disbelief, but with curiosity. In 2010, two scientists, Carl Drews and Waking Han, used advanced ocean modeling software to simulate the geography of the ancient Nile Delta. They recreated the wind, the terrain, the shallow marshlands that may have once stretched between the lakes of Tanis and the Gulf of Suez. And the results were astonishing. A strong east wind, around 65 miles per hour, blowing steadily for 12 hours across that narrow bend, could have pushed back the waters, exposing a temporary land bridge nearly 3 miles long and 4 miles wide. When the wind stopped, the waters would return within minutes. No divine lightning, no supernatural explosion, just physics, working with terrifying precision. But for those standing there, physics and faith were one and the same. The timing was the miracle. Because science can explain the how, but never the why. It can measure the strength of the wind, but not the courage of the people who walked into it. It can map the terrain, but not the faith that led them through the storm. And that is the quiet truth of history. Miracles often hide behind the machinery of the natural world. The divine does not always shout. Sometimes it whispers through equation. The parting of the sea was not just an event. It was an intersection, where the hand of nature met the heart of faith, where logic and belief, so often enemies, walked side by side across the same dry ground. Thousands of years later, scientists still run simulation, theologians still debate, and the sea still moves as it always did, obedient to the wind, indifferent to argument. But the story endures because of what it means, not because of how it happened. It is proof that belief can live within reason, and that reason, at its highest point, always leads back to wonder. Morning breaks over a quiet coast. The water glows gold under the rising sun. To anyone standing there today, it's just another shore, ordinary, timeless, whispering with wind and salt. But beneath those waves lies the memory of a night when the impossible happened. A night when wind, faith, and fear converged to rewrite the story of human defiance. The sea has forgotten their name, but the world has not. For the Hebrews, the crossing became more than survival. It was rebirth, the end of slavery, the beginning of identity. Every generation after would sing of it. They would call it deliverance, the day when God's power moved not through armies or king, but through the weak and desperate, those who had nothing left but faith. For Egypt, it was silence. The empire of stone, unshakable for centuries, was humbled by mud and water. They recorded no defeat, Yet the absence in their chronicles spoke louder than words. Historians still debate, theologians still argue, but the truth of the event transcends evidence because faith was never meant to be proven, only lived. The miracle of the Red Sea was not that the water parted, it was that people dared to walk through it. Across millennia, the story echoes. In every uprising, every march toward freedom, every whisper of hope that defies power, when the oppressed stand before their own impossible barrier, they still remember this sea. They still wait for the wind. And the same question rises again, generation after generation. Was it chance? Was it wind? Or was it will, divine or human, that moved the waters? The answer doesn't matter anymore. What matters is what the story left behind. The reminder that faith and fear can coexist, that courage often begins where certainty ends, and that sometimes the greatest engineering of all is belief itself. The Red Sea did not part because man commanded it. It parted because history demanded it, so that those who followed would never forget that freedom begins when the tide turns against the proud